Ladies and gentlemen, one of the greatest tragedies of human existence is not poverty, nor failure, nor rejection. It is the loss of identity. When a person does not know who they truly are, or fears being known, they begin to construct a life that looks impressive on the outside, but feels empty within. This is the birthplace of a false life. Living a double life slowly erodes the human spirit in ways that are not always visible to the outside world. At first, it may seem harmless. A small adjustment in behavior, a selective truth here, a hidden detail there. But over time, these small compromises grow into a wide gap between who a person truly is and who they pretend to be. This gap becomes emotionally exhausting because the mind was never designed to sustain two identities at once. One identity is the private self, filled with genuine feelings, desires, fears, and questions. The other identity is the public performance, carefully crafted to gain approval, avoid rejection, or maintain control. The tension between these two selves creates internal conflict that quietly drains confidence and peace. When a person lives this way for a long period, they begin to lose clarity about their real identity. They no longer know which thoughts are authentic and which are rehearsed. Conversations become calculated rather than natural. Relationships become strategic rather than sincere. Instead of connecting with people, they manage impressions. Instead of expressing truth, they edit themselves. This constant self-monitoring produces anxiety because the individual is always afraid of being found out, even when there is nothing morally wrong with their true self. The fear itself becomes the prison. The mind stays alert, guarded, and defensive, never fully relaxed. A double life also damages self-esteem. Confidence that is built on performance is fragile. It depends on applause, validation, and external approval. The moment criticism appears or admiration fades, the individual feels exposed and insecure. True confidence grows from self-understanding, but a double life prevents that understanding from developing. You cannot fully respect yourself while constantly hiding from yourself. The internal message becomes, my real self is not acceptable, and this belief slowly weakens personal power. The person may appear bold or even arrogant, yet deep inside there is uncertainty and emotional fatigue. Another danger is the impact on relationships. Genuine relationships require honesty and vulnerability. When someone lives behind a mask, they attract connections that are based on the mask, not the person. Friends, partners, and colleagues respond to the projected image, not the authentic individual. This leads to loneliness even in crowded rooms. The person may be surrounded by people yet still feel unseen. Emotional isolation grows because there is always a part of the self that remains hidden. Over time, this isolation can lead to resentment, frustration, or even anger toward others, when in reality the conflict exists within. Living two lives also affects decision-making. Choices become guided by fear rather than purpose. Instead of asking, what aligns with my values? The person asks, what will keep my image safe? This mindset limits growth. Opportunities for genuine happiness may be ignored because they threaten the false persona. The individual becomes trapped in maintaining appearances rather than pursuing fulfillment. Life turns into maintenance instead of discovery. Creativity declines, spontaneity disappears, and joy becomes conditional. There is also a physical and mental cost. Chronic stress from hiding truth can lead to fatigue, sleep problems, irritability, and difficulty concentrating. The brain consumes enormous energy trying to maintain consistency between two identities. Memory becomes strained because the person must remember which version of themselves they presented to whom. This mental overload can create emotional instability and burnout. The body often reflects what the mind struggles to contain. However, the most profound danger is spiritual, the loss of inner peace. Peace comes from alignment when thoughts, words, and actions move in the same direction. A double life breaks this alignment. The individual may achieve success, recognition, or admiration, yet still feel empty. Achievements feel hollow because they are credited to the mask rather than the true self. Satisfaction fades quickly, and the search for validation becomes endless. It is like trying to fill a leaking container. No matter how much praise is poured in, it never stays. The path out of this danger begins with honesty toward oneself. Self-reflection allows a person to question why the mask was created in the first place. Often it was born from fear of rejection, past criticism, or social pressure. Understanding this origin replaces shame with awareness. From awareness comes courage. The courage to make small, truthful choices, to express genuine opinions, and to build relationships based on reality instead of performance. Authenticity does not mean revealing everything to everyone. It means no longer betraying your own identity for acceptance. When a person gradually aligns their inner truth with their outer life, energy returns, confidence strengthens, and relationships become more meaningful. The mind relaxes because it no longer needs to guard a secret identity. The heart becomes lighter because it is no longer divided. The individual discovers that true strength does not come from perfect appearances, but from honest existence. A single, authentic life may not impress everyone, but it will bring something far more valuable: peace, clarity, and the freedom to live without fear. Living a double life slowly divides the human mind into two separate worlds: the world that is shown and the world that is hidden. At first, this division may seem harmless, even protective. A person may believe they are simply managing their image or avoiding conflict. But over time, this separation begins to demand energy, constant vigilance, and emotional control. Every conversation becomes a performance. Every relationship becomes a stage. The individual is no longer living, they are acting. This is exhausting because the brain was never designed to sustain two identities at once. The pressure to maintain a carefully constructed persona creates anxiety, irritability, and emotional distance from others. The person may appear confident, outspoken, or even dominant. Yet internally they feel fragile and alert, always afraid that someone might see through the mask. This fear changes behavior. It affects decision-making, relationships, and even physical health. Sleep becomes disturbed, trust becomes difficult, and genuine joy becomes rare. A double life also isolates a person socially. When you are pretending, you cannot fully connect because connection requires honesty. You may be surrounded by people yet feel profoundly alone because no one truly knows you. The tragedy is not simply deception. It is the loss of intimacy with oneself. The longer the performance continues, the harder it becomes to stop because the false identity starts to feel safer than the real one. Yet safety built on illusion is unstable. It is like building a house on sand. It may stand for a while, but it cannot withstand storms. The mind begins to rationalize the deception, convincing itself that this is necessary for survival or acceptance. However, what begins as protection often becomes imprisonment. The person becomes a guardian of their own cage, constantly defending the walls they secretly wish to tear down. Education and self-awareness reveal that the cost of a double life is far greater than the fear that created it. When individuals learn about emotional health, psychology, and identity development, they begin to recognize that authenticity is not recklessness, it is alignment. Alignment brings peace because it removes the need for constant performance. The energy once spent on hiding can then be invested in growth, relationships, and purpose. Freedom does not arrive in a dramatic moment. It arrives gradually as honesty replaces fear and self-understanding replaces self-denial. Identity and image are often confused, yet they are fundamentally different forces. Image is what people curate, identity is what they discover. Image is external, shaped by expectations, culture, and social pressure. Identity is internal, shaped by self-reflection, values, and truth. When a person prioritizes image over identity, they begin living according to applause rather than authenticity. This creates a cycle where approval becomes addictive. The individual learns what gains admiration and repeats it, even if it contradicts their inner reality. Over time, the gap between how they are perceived and how they actually feel widens. This gap becomes a source of internal tension. The person may achieve status, recognition, or influence, yet still experience emptiness because their achievements are connected to an image rather than their true self. An image must be constantly updated and defended. Identity, once understood, becomes a stable foundation. The danger of image-driven living is that it places self-worth in the hands of others. Public opinion becomes a mirror that determines value. When praise increases, confidence rises. When criticism appears, self-esteem collapses. This emotional dependency creates instability and insecurity. In contrast, identity-driven living creates resilience. A person who understands their values, beliefs, and inner truth does not crumble under external pressure because their sense of self is not negotiable. Education plays a crucial role here. When individuals study human behavior, emotional intelligence, and personal development, they begin to ask deeper questions. Who am I beyond roles, beyond expectations, beyond appearances? These questions are powerful because they shift focus from performance to purpose. Image seeks validation, identity seeks meaning. Image is concerned with how loud the applause is, identity is concerned with how aligned the heart feels. When identity becomes the priority, decisions become clearer, relationships become more genuine, and life gains direction. The person no longer needs to exaggerate, manipulate, or dominate to feel significant. They understand that significance is not something granted by society, but something realized within. The transformation from image-centered living to identity-centered living is not instant. It requires courage, introspection, and patience. Yet once this shift occurs, the individual experiences a profound sense of stability. They stop chasing approval and start cultivating authenticity. And in that authenticity, they find a confidence that does not need to be announced, defended, or displayed. It simply exists quietly and powerfully. Fear is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior, yet it is often invisible. It does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It does not always stop people from moving forward. Sometimes it pushes them to run in the wrong direction. When fear enters the heart, it rarely announces itself as fear. Instead, it disguises itself as pride, arrogance, control, or even excessive confidence. Many individuals who appear strong on the outside are actually negotiating silent battles within. They are not driven by courage, but by the terror of being exposed, misunderstood, or rejected. Fear becomes the architect of their decisions, and without realizing it, they begin to design a life not based on truth but on protection. Deception often begins as a survival mechanism. A person tells a small lie to avoid embarrassment, then another to avoid conflict, then another to avoid rejection. Over time, these small distortions form a pattern, and the pattern becomes a personality. The individual is no longer simply hiding a fact, they are hiding themselves. Fear convinces them that honesty will cost them love, respect, or belonging. It whispers that acceptance is conditional and that their worth depends on performance. When this belief settles deeply in the mind, deception no longer feels like a choice. It feels like necessity. The tragedy is that the very thing they fear losing becomes the very thing deception destroys. Fear also creates internal division. One part of the person knows the truth, while another part works tirelessly to conceal it. This inner conflict consumes emotional energy. The mind becomes crowded with calculations: what to say, how to act, how to appear. Life becomes a stage rather than a journey. Every interaction feels like an audition, every conversation a performance. Such a lifestyle is exhausting because it demands constant vigilance. The individual is not living, they are maintaining an illusion. And illusions are fragile. They require endless reinforcement, while truth stands on its own without effort. The psychological cost of fear-based deception is immense. Anxiety increases because the mind is always anticipating discovery. Relationships remain shallow because genuine connection requires vulnerability. Success feels hollow because achievements are tied to an image rather than identity. Even moments of praise fail to bring satisfaction because the person knows the applause is not for who they truly are, but for the character they have created. This disconnect leads to emotional emptiness. It is possible to be surrounded by people yet feel completely alone when no one truly knows you. Fear also distorts perception. It convinces individuals that rejection is inevitable and acceptance is impossible. It magnifies imagined threats and minimizes potential support. In reality, many fears are projections, not facts. But when a person believes fear more than truth, they surrender control of their life. Decisions become reactions rather than intentions. Instead of asking, what is right, they ask, what is safe? Safety then replaces purpose, and comfort replaces growth. Yet comfort built on deception is unstable. It is like building a house on sand. It may stand for a while, but it cannot endure storms. Education and self-awareness are powerful antidotes to fear. When people understand the psychological roots of their behavior, they begin to separate perception from reality. Awareness turns the light on in a dark room. What once felt overwhelming becomes understandable, and what is understandable becomes manageable. Fear loses its authority the moment it is examined rather than obeyed. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision that truth is more valuable than comfort. When individuals choose honesty, even in small steps, they begin reclaiming their identity from the grip of deception. Compassion also plays a crucial role. Fear thrives in environments of judgment and shame. When people feel attacked or ridiculed, they retreat further into disguise. But when they encounter empathy and understanding, they gain the confidence to confront their own truths. Compassion does not excuse harmful behavior, it creates space for transformation. It reminds individuals that they are more than their mistakes and more than their fears. In such an environment, authenticity becomes possible, and authenticity dissolves deception naturally. Ultimately, fear is not defeated by force but by clarity. When a person realizes that their value is inherent rather than earned through performance, the need for deception weakens. Truth becomes less frightening than the burden of pretending. The mask begins to feel heavier than honesty, and in that moment, a powerful shift occurs. The individual moves from survival to alignment. They stop constructing a life designed to impress and start cultivating a life designed to express. Freedom emerges not because the world has changed, but because the relationship with fear has changed. The person no longer asks, "How can I hide?" but instead asks, "How can I live?" Many people spend years carefully designing a public image while neglecting their private identity. They learn how to dress, speak, and behave in ways that earn applause. Yet deep inside, they feel disconnected from themselves. This inner split often begins with fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of not belonging. When fear becomes the architect of a person's choices, life slowly turns into a performance instead of a journey of growth. The danger of living this kind of double life is not only emotional exhaustion, but also the gradual loss of self-awareness. A person can become so skilled at pretending that they forget what is real. They wake up each day playing a role, smiling on command, achieving outward success, yet struggling with silent anxiety. Over time, the gap between the public self and the private self widens, and maintaining that gap requires enormous energy. This is why many individuals who appear strong on the outside often feel fragile inside. They are not only managing responsibilities, they are managing an illusion. A double life is heavy because truth is light, and anything built on concealment demands constant maintenance. At the core of this struggle lies the conflict between identity and image. Identity is who you are when no one is watching. Image is who you appear to be when everyone is watching. Society often rewards image more than identity, which tempts people to polish their appearance instead of understanding their essence. Yet image is temporary, identity is foundational. When a person invests all their effort into appearance, they build a structure without a solid base. The world may applaud the image, but the soul longs for authenticity. Education and self-reflection reveal that a stable life is not built on admiration, but on self-knowledge. When someone truly understands their values, emotions, and motivations, they become less dependent on external validation. They stop chasing approval and start pursuing alignment. This alignment is what creates confidence that does not shake under criticism. The tragedy is not that people want to be accepted. The tragedy is when acceptance becomes more important than truth. A strong identity allows a person to interact with the world honestly rather than defensively. Without it, every conversation becomes a stage and every relationship becomes an audience. Fear is often the hidden engine behind deception. It whispers that being seen as you are is dangerous, that vulnerability invites rejection, that honesty leads to loss. This fear does not always shout. Sometimes it quietly shapes decisions, encouraging people to exaggerate achievements, hide feelings, or construct narratives that make them appear invincible. Over time, fear transforms into habit, and habit transforms into character. The psychological cost of this is immense. Constantly monitoring what you say and how you appear creates stress, and stress affects not only the mind but also the body. Sleep becomes restless, relationships become shallow, and joy becomes conditional. Deception is exhausting because it requires memory, remembering what story was told, what emotion was suppressed, what truth was avoided. Honesty, on the other hand, requires courage but saves energy. When individuals learn that fear loses power when confronted, they begin to understand that authenticity is not a threat to their survival, but a gateway to peace. The mind becomes calmer when it is no longer divided between truth and performance. Another powerful force in this dynamic is pride mixed with insecurity, which often manifests as superiority or excessive self-focus. When someone feels uncertain about their worth, they may overcompensate by projecting dominance or perfection. This is not always arrogance in its pure form. Sometimes it is a protective shell formed over years of internal doubt. Pride can become a mask that hides vulnerability, and the louder the pride, the deeper the hidden insecurity may be. The educational lesson here is that emotional intelligence is more valuable than external status. True strength is not the ability to appear flawless, but the ability to acknowledge imperfections without losing dignity. Compassion plays a crucial role in breaking this cycle. When people feel understood rather than judged, they are more willing to explore their true identity. Healing does not come from criticism, it comes from awareness and acceptance. A person who learns to face their inner truth gradually discovers that authenticity brings a unique kind of confidence, one that does not need constant praise. Such confidence allows individuals to build relationships based on honesty rather than performance, and a life based on truth rather than illusion. In the end, the greatest victory is not conquering public opinion, but conquering the fear that once demanded a false life. When a human being begins to live a double life, the conflict does not only exist in their actions, it exists in their mind, their emotions, and even their physical energy. Living two realities at once requires constant performance. One version of the person is shown to the world, polished, confident, and carefully designed, while another version remains hidden, often carrying fear, confusion, or shame. This inner division drains mental strength because the individual must continuously remember which role they are playing. Over time, this performance becomes exhausting, and the person may become irritable, defensive, or overly controlling, not because they are naturally harsh, but because maintaining a false identity consumes enormous emotional resources. A double life is like carrying two heavy bags everywhere you go. Eventually, the weight becomes unbearable, and the person either collapses under the pressure or begins to question why they are carrying the load in the first place. The difference between identity and image is one of the most important educational lessons anyone can learn. Identity is who you are when no one is watching. Image is who you pretend to be when everyone is watching. Many people spend years perfecting their image while neglecting their identity. They invest in appearance, reputation, and social approval, but rarely invest in self-understanding. The problem with image is that it depends on other people's opinions, and opinions change like the wind. Identity, however, is stable when it is rooted in self-awareness and truth. When a person confuses image for identity, they become trapped in a cycle of pleasing others. They may gain applause, but they lose peace. Education and self-reflection teach that identity is not built by comparison, it is built by discovery. The moment someone stops asking, "How do I look to others?" and starts asking, "Who am I truly?" is the moment personal freedom begins. Fear is often the invisible architect behind deception. People rarely create false stories or exaggerated personalities without a reason. The reason is usually the fear of rejection, abandonment, or humiliation. Fear whispers that the truth is dangerous, that honesty will lead to loss, and that acceptance must be earned through performance. When fear becomes dominant, deception starts to feel like protection rather than dishonesty. The individual convinces themselves that they are simply managing perception, but in reality, they are managing anxiety. Fear can push a person to build emotional walls, adopt superiority attitudes, or dismiss others before they themselves are dismissed. Yet fear thrives in silence and weakens in understanding. The more a person educates themselves about emotional health, psychology, and self-worth, the less power fear holds over their decisions. Courage does not always mean public declarations. Sometimes courage begins privately, with honest self-acknowledgement and gradual steps toward authenticity. Hiding one's truth carries a psychological cost that many people underestimate. The mind is not designed to operate under constant concealment. Suppressed thoughts do not disappear. They transform into stress, insecurity, or defensive behavior. A person who constantly hides essential parts of themselves may experience anxiety, mood swings, or feelings of emptiness without fully understanding why. The brain spends energy monitoring speech, actions, and expressions to avoid exposure, which leaves little room for creativity, joy, or emotional connection. This internal tension can also affect relationships because genuine intimacy requires vulnerability. When vulnerability is blocked, relationships become surface, level, and transactional rather than meaningful. Education in emotional intelligence teaches that mental well-being is closely tied to authenticity. The more aligned a person is with their inner truth, the more stable their emotional state becomes. Suppression may provide temporary safety, but long-term peace only grows where honesty exists. Pride and ego often act as masks rather than mirrors. From the outside, excessive pride may look like confidence, but in many situations it is actually a shield protecting fragile self-esteem. When someone constantly seeks admiration, refuses criticism, or portrays themselves as superior, it can be a strategy to prevent others from seeing their insecurities. Ego becomes a costume worn to hide vulnerability. The danger of this mask is that it isolates the individual. People may admire the image, but they struggle to connect with the person behind it. True confidence does not require constant validation because it is rooted in acceptance rather than comparison. When a person learns that worth is not measured by applause or dominance, the need for ego gradually decreases. Compassion, both toward oneself and toward others, becomes the antidote to excessive pride. A compassionate mindset allows individuals to admit imperfections without feeling diminished. In that space, growth becomes possible, relationships become deeper, and life becomes less about proving value and more about living it. Authenticity is one of the most powerful yet most misunderstood forces in human life. Many people believe freedom comes from money, status, influence, or recognition, but true freedom begins much deeper. It begins when a person stops running from their own reflection. A person can travel the world and still feel trapped if they are hiding from themselves, while another person with very little can feel completely liberated simply because they are honest about who they are. Authenticity is not about announcing every detail of your life to the world. It is about no longer being at war within your own mind. When individuals deny their true feelings, desires, or identity, they create internal tension. This tension is like carrying a heavy weight that no one else can see. Over time, it drains energy, clouds judgment, and weakens confidence. People often attempt to compensate for this inner discomfort by building impressive outer images: success, charm, control, or dominance. Yet the more the outer image grows, the more fragile it becomes, because it is built on fear rather than truth. Authenticity, however, is stable because it is rooted in acceptance. It does not require constant maintenance, approval, or applause. Freedom through authenticity is not instant. It is a process of self-education. It begins with self-awareness, the courage to ask honest questions. Why do I behave this way? What am I afraid of? What am I trying to prove? These questions are not meant to produce shame. They are meant to produce clarity. Many people avoid these questions because they fear what they might discover. Yet what they fail to realize is that avoidance prolongs suffering, while understanding opens the door to growth. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge, and you cannot transform what you pretend does not exist. Another dimension of authenticity is emotional honesty. Society often teaches people to suppress emotions to appear strong, but suppression is not strength, it is delay. Emotions that are ignored do not disappear, they accumulate. Over time, they surface as anger, insecurity, arrogance, or manipulation. Emotional honesty does not mean uncontrolled expression. It means recognizing your feelings, understanding their origin, and responding with maturity rather than denial. When a person becomes emotionally honest with themselves, they begin to act with intention instead of reaction. Authenticity also brings clarity in relationships. When individuals are not pretending, they attract people who appreciate them for who they truly are rather than who they pretend to be. This reduces the pressure to perform and increases the quality of connections. Many relationships fail not because of incompatibility, but because of hidden identities and unspoken fears. When authenticity is present, communication becomes clearer, trust becomes stronger, and respect becomes mutual. People no longer feel the need to compete or dominate. They feel safe to collaborate and understand. Freedom through authenticity also impacts decision-making. A person who knows themselves makes choices based on purpose rather than pressure. They are less influenced by trends, criticism, or comparison. Comparison is one of the greatest thieves of peace because it shifts focus from personal growth to external validation. Authentic individuals understand that their journey is unique. They measure progress by alignment with their values rather than by the applause of the crowd. This mindset creates resilience because their confidence is not dependent on public opinion. However, authenticity does not mean recklessness or disregard for others. True authenticity is guided by wisdom and empathy. It acknowledges personal truth while respecting the dignity of others. It is not about rebellion, it is about alignment. When authenticity is combined with compassion, it becomes a force for healing rather than division. People begin to understand that everyone carries unseen struggles, and this awareness reduces judgment while increasing understanding. The journey toward authenticity often requires courage because it involves releasing masks that once felt protective. Yet those masks eventually become prisons. The moment a person chooses honesty over fear, they begin to experience relief. That relief is the first taste of real freedom. The freedom of not pretending, not performing, not hiding. It is the freedom of waking up without the burden of maintaining a false image. Over time, this freedom transforms self-esteem, mental clarity, and emotional stability. In the end, authenticity is not merely a personality trait, it is a lifestyle choice. It is the daily decision to live in truth rather than illusion, to grow rather than hide, and to accept oneself while continuously striving to improve. When a person embraces authenticity, they discover that freedom was never outside of them. It was always within, waiting for honesty to unlock it. Compassion is one of the most misunderstood strengths in human character. Many people confuse compassion with agreement, weakness, or surrender. But true compassion is neither passive nor blind. It is the ability to recognize the humanity in another person even when their behavior is difficult to understand. When individuals live behind masks, when they build exaggerated images of success or superiority, or when they hide parts of their identity out of fear, judgment from others often becomes the very force that pushes them deeper into secrecy. Judgment closes doors, compassion opens them. Judgment says, "You are wrong and you must hide." Compassion says, You are struggling, and you can heal. Every human being is fighting battles that are invisible to the public eye. Some battles are internal conflicts about identity, acceptance, or belonging. When a person feels unsafe expressing their truth, they may create a defensive personality that appears arrogant, distant, or self-centered. Society often responds to this behavior with criticism or ridicule, but criticism rarely transforms a person. It only hardens their defenses. Compassion, however, has the power to soften walls that years of fear have built. It allows a person to feel seen rather than attacked, understood rather than condemned. Education teaches us that behavior is often a symptom, not the root. When we judge only the behavior, we miss the deeper story. A person who constantly seeks admiration may actually be starving for validation. A person who exaggerates achievements may be covering deep insecurity. A person who hides their truth may be terrified of rejection. Compassion does not excuse harmful actions, but it seeks to understand the emotional or psychological pain beneath them. Understanding is the first step toward meaningful change because people are more willing to grow when they do not feel threatened. Judgment creates isolation. When people feel judged, they withdraw emotionally even if they remain physically present. They build thicker masks, stronger egos, and louder personas to protect themselves. Compassion does the opposite. It creates emotional safety. Emotional safety is the environment where honesty can exist. When someone feels safe, they are more likely to confront their fears, question their behavior, and accept their identity. Compassion is not about approving every choice. It is about creating a space where transformation becomes possible. It is also important to recognize that compassion is not only for others, it must begin within ourselves. Many individuals are harsh critics of their own mistakes and identities. Self-judgment can be more destructive than public criticism because it becomes a constant internal voice that says, "You are not enough." When a person lacks self-compassion, they often project that harshness onto others. A compassionate society is built from compassionate individuals who understand their own imperfections and therefore become less eager to condemn the imperfections of others. Self-compassion leads to humility, and humility opens the door to empathy. Compassion requires emotional intelligence. It demands that we pause before reacting, that we ask questions before forming conclusions, and that we listen before speaking. In a world driven by quick opinions and public exposure, compassion is a deliberate choice. It is the decision to see people as evolving beings rather than fixed labels. When we practice compassion, we acknowledge that identity is complex, that growth takes time, and that fear can distort behavior. This awareness prevents us from simplifying someone's entire character based on one visible trait or one misunderstood action. Furthermore, compassion does not eliminate accountability, it enhances it. When people are treated with dignity, they are more receptive to responsibility. They do not feel attacked, they feel guided. Constructive conversations replace hostile confrontations. Instead of forcing change through shame, compassion inspires change through encouragement. It communicates the message that improvement is possible and that mistakes do not define a person's entire worth. In communities where compassion thrives, authenticity becomes less frightening. People feel less pressure to maintain false images and more courage to live truthfully. Compassion reduces the need for masks because acceptance reduces fear. When fear decreases, honesty increases. This is how compassion becomes not just a moral value, but a social solution. It allows individuals to step out of shadows and into self, understanding without the terror of rejection. Ultimately, compassion is a form of strength because it requires maturity, patience, and wisdom. It demands that we rise above instinctive reactions and choose understanding over condemnation. A compassionate heart does not ignore flaws, it recognizes potential. It understands that every person is a work in progress, and that growth is encouraged by kindness more than by criticism. When compassion replaces judgment, people begin to feel human again rather than labeled. And in that restored humanity lies the possibility of genuine transformation and inner peace. A double life is never created because someone enjoys deception. It is usually born from fear and prolonged insecurity. When an individual believes that their natural identity will not be accepted, they begin to design an alternative version of themselves that appears safer, stronger, or more socially acceptable. This process may start subtly, changing opinions to fit in, hiding personal truths, exaggerating achievements. But over time, it becomes a full-scale performance. Living two lives requires constant mental effort, and this pressure slowly erodes emotional stability. The person may appear confident in public, yet internally they are exhausted from maintaining a character that is not truly theirs. The danger is not only the lie itself, but the long-term psychological strain of never being able to rest in authenticity. Identity and image are not the same, yet many people confuse the two. Identity is who you are when no one is watching. Image is who you pretend to be when everyone is watching. When a person invests more energy in protecting an image than understanding their identity, they begin to live externally rather than internally. Their decisions become guided by applause instead of purpose. This imbalance creates emptiness because image demands constant validation while identity provides internal stability. A life driven by image is like a building with beautiful paint but a weak foundation. It may impress at first glance, but it cannot withstand pressure or time. Fear is often the silent architect behind deception. Fear of rejection, ridicule, abandonment, or misunderstanding can push individuals to hide essential parts of themselves. Instead of confronting fear, they construct protective layers of behavior, personality, and social performance. These layers may include excessive confidence, emotional detachment, or superiority. Fear convinces them that survival depends on concealment rather than honesty. Over time, the fear becomes so normalized that the individual forgets what genuine self-expression feels like. What started as a defense mechanism slowly transforms into a permanent lifestyle. The psychological cost of hiding truth is immense. Suppressed emotions do not disappear, they accumulate. The mind becomes divided between what is shown and what is felt, creating internal conflict. This conflict may manifest as anxiety, irritability, depression, or emotional numbness. Relationships suffer because connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is impossible when someone is constantly guarding a secret. The energy required to maintain secrecy drains creativity, focus, and joy. Eventually, the person may feel disconnected not only from others, but from themselves, unsure of which version is real. Pride and ego often act as masks rather than genuine confidence. When someone feels insecure about their identity, they may adopt exaggerated pride to compensate. Arrogance can become a shield that prevents others from getting too close, because closeness risks exposure. This inflated self-image is fragile. It depends on comparison and control. The person may seek admiration obsessively while fearing criticism intensely. What appears as strength is often vulnerability disguised as dominance. True confidence is calm and grounded, while ego is loud and defensive. Authenticity, though difficult, is the pathway to inner freedom. When individuals align their inner truth with their outer behavior, they experience relief rather than tension. Authenticity does not mean revealing everything to everyone. It means no longer fighting against your own reality. It allows decisions to be guided by values rather than fear. An authentic person spends less time proving and more time growing. Their energy shifts from maintaining illusions to building meaningful experiences. Freedom is not the absence of challenges. It is the absence of internal contradiction. Compassion plays a crucial role in breaking cycles of deception. Judgment intensifies secrecy, while understanding creates safety. When people feel emotionally secure, they are more willing to confront their truths and seek healing. Compassion does not mean approving harmful behavior. It means recognizing the human struggle beneath it. Education and empathy encourage open dialogue, reduce stigma, and foster environments where honesty becomes less frightening. Societies that value emotional intelligence over superficial perfection create healthier individuals and stronger communities. Healing begins with self-acceptance and honesty. A person cannot transform what they refuse to acknowledge. Self-acceptance is not surrender, it is awareness. It is the courage to face reality without self-hatred. Honesty with oneself leads to clarity, and clarity leads to purposeful change. When individuals stop running from their truth, they reclaim mental energy, emotional balance, and personal dignity. The journey toward authenticity may be uncomfortable, but it ultimately replaces fear with peace. A life built on truth may not always be easy, but it is stable, meaningful, and deeply liberating. The most powerful life is not the loudest one. It is the most authentic one. When truth replaces fear, the mask falls, and the individual finally experiences peace. Not the peace of applause, but the peace of inner alignment. Education, self-reflection, and compassion are the keys that unlock that freedom.